you have to go through so much shit and like ups and downs and whatnot. There needs to be some kind of a very strong motivation, because if there isn't, then the first time things get tough, they'll probably quit.
Welcome to the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence Podcast. It is a great pleasure. I have Yotam Rosenbaum here with me today. He is the founding partner of First Peak Ventures, and he has done, probably 255, maybe getting even closer to 300 investments in early stage companies, largely, maybe exclusively YC companies. We're going to talk about all those things. But before we digging even into all of that, and of course, you've been a founder of a company, you went through YC yourself, all those great things. But I just want to continue the conversation we were having before we just started recording, which is like, we both hate the fact that you can see yourself on the recording. And why is that not the default to just hide that when you do any sort of screen recording, screen share, Zoom, you name it? I don't understand it. I hide it every single time. It is unnatural to see yourself in a mirror while you're talking. Why do these companies have that as a default?
Yeah, maybe we should dedicate this whole podcast to just, bitching about this, and then share it with Zoom and Google Meets and change the world, because that needs to change.
It would actually probably improve the world in multiple ways. But what do you actually, in a sort of funny way, what do you think the legitimate product decisions are that why they've done it that way, since it is
it is interesting, because seriously, like every call I join, that is the first thing that I do, and it really bothers me. I know some other people don't care about it, but I do. If I had to bet, I would assume that most people prefer not to see themselves when they speak. So yeah, I am curious to know, like, what was the thinking or lack of thinking of that morning.
Well, we're all sort of, you can't help, 99% of people can't help kind of look at themselves, think about their looks, things like that to some extent.
Yeah.
And so, maybe you look in the mirror in the morning when you get going, but I don't want to look in the mirror all day long. And especially not on a conversation. Like, how distracting is that? Yet, presumably there are smart product people at Google's, Google Meet, at Microsoft Teams, at Zoom.
Actually, here's a theory.
They're not smart people there. No.
No. The theory is, and that's, there is actually some value in seeing yourself at the first, like before you join the call, because what if your background is like all messed up, or you have something between your teeth, when you join?
But they all show a preview already. They show you a preview of what you're going to look like before you. So why can't you just press a button or have it turn on as default? Don't show me to myself when I'm on the call.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, it doesn't make any sense. But we will talk about all these things. But I gave a short overview of your background. Tell people a little bit more. Why should they care about listening to you and hearing what you have to say about the world? Tell us more. And you're getting your day started. For everyone to know, Yotam is calling in from, it's 6:30, 7:30 a.m. right now for you in Australia, where
it's 8:30 a.m. Friday morning. Yeah. Why should people listen to me? I don't know. That's a tough question. I'll leave that to them to decide. But I think I've had definitely a pretty interesting story and background. Really did not intend to end up where I am today and doing what I'm doing today. So yeah, I'm happy to chat about that. I can give a brief overview, or if you want, whatever works for you.
Yeah, I can. Maybe I'll sort of do a little of the overview and let you fill in the blanks, right? But the high level, basically, you were a commander in the Israeli Defense Forces, IDF. And that will be an interesting discussion about kind of like why so many really good founders have come from that. But that's one. Then you went into music, something very different. And then you ended up becoming a founder, got into YC early on, and then made the move from being a founder to an investor. And that's essentially what your career has been since then. So what pieces did I miss there? What's missing in that?
That's the gist of it, except that the music came first. So, started playing music as a kid, and then, had to do the 3 years of army service. And after that, got a scholarship to go study music at Berklee College of Music and moved to the US in year 2000. And what's that? I'm a drummer. I majored in composition. So when I graduated from Berklee, I moved to Los Angeles to pursue a career as a musician, which is what I did for 5 years. Produced wrote music for TV, film, a few bands and albums. And really it was through that experience that I learned how nearly impossible it is to market music effectively as an independent band or record label. And out of the frustration,
What year was that? Like, has that changed in a modern times where there's Spotify, there's social media? Does that change? Has that changed to market music?
it definitely does, not necessarily in a good way. So we had a band, my best friend and I. It was a pretty big band. It was a 10-piece funk, jazz, hip hop group called the Capitalist Hippie Complex. Uh, Produced an album. I had a good product. Yeah, played gigs, did some festivals and whatnot. But really, 2 years into it, we sort of failed in like achieving, building a momentum and a following and whatnot. And it was actually in 2008 that we were stuck in traffic going from LA to San Diego on 405. And I started having a conversation about like, why is this not working? And like, why all these tools that we've been using and spend a lot of money on trying to market our music are not providing real meaningful value or ROI for us? And quickly realized that the best way to market music is the radio. Like people discovered music by hearing the music, right?
Makes sense.
And at the time, Pandora was blowing up in the US. And we thought, well, that's cool because like in the past, you could only fit, 10 songs per hour in terrestrial radio. Now you can fit, infinite number of songs and for the taste of every listener. And then we thought about another business, which is Google AdWords, that basically allows small businesses to market themselves, no matter if you have $5 budget per week or $500,000, right? And then we sort of like, well, what happens if we actually put the two together? So allow bands and record labels to bid for airtime and be played to qualified audience. So if I am, I have a hip hop group and we're going on tour, and I want to promote the tour in Seattle first and then in San Francisco, wherever, I can buy airtime in those areas in the weeks coming before the show. And instead of using the music to sell ads and commercials, which is the business model of most platforms, we will use it to help the artists monetize the audience. So concert tickets, merchandise, all those things.
Yeah.
So by the time we got to San Diego on that trip, we were like, oh my God, this is genius. Like
we've solved the problem.
We solved the problem. We talked about it the whole weekend. In fact, we kept on talking about it for 2 years. I had no intention whatsoever to actually start a startup. I knew absolutely nothing about startups. I was, again, just a professional musician. But the song was
so tech startups like were not even your world in any way whatsoever. No, people. Well, you a fun, funky musician.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been curious about it and about innovation in general, and I've as a musician also, like I've always been in business because you have to. But like proper startup stuff, no. Like I honestly, like that was not my area. But the problem was that the more, like, we couldn't stop talking about the idea, and we kept on getting like strong validation from the market. Like my friends would tell me, yeah, like if you build this, I'll pay for this kind of service. And, some other people more like business minded said, yeah, it's actually really smart. You should build it. So finally in 2010, Joe and I were like, well, what are we doing here? Like, how long are we going to continue ignoring this idea that we just can't get rid of? So we're like, okay, well, let's give it a shot. We started the company, called it Earbits, started building, got a third co-founder who started like actually coding. Now it was really challenging because when you think about it, it's like it's a marketplace, because unlike the other platforms that basically go and do like a blanket license where they pay a bunch of money to use like a whole catalog of like 40 million songs, our business model was entirely different. Not only we're not paying royalties, we're actually asking the bands and the artists to pay us to get more exposure, which means that we had to build the catalog from nothing. And it's a chicken and egg. If you don't have much music, it will be difficult to attract listeners. If you don't have a lot of listeners, it will be difficult to attract a lot of bands. So we had to start from zero. I started just by reaching out to my circle of friends and artists, and everyone was like, yeah, absolutely. I mean, at the beginning also we built in a way that all we ask them is, can we use your music? You don't have to pay anything, but we won't pay you royalties for it.
Okay.
Um,
And they said yes. It's some document saying, yeah, you can use it.
Absolutely. And then one of my friends said, hey, actually, you should speak to I'm working with a small record label. So I reached out, and to my surprise, like a week later, I have a hard drive of their entire catalog. Mind you, at this point, we didn't even have a website. This was just all based on this is what we want to build.
So there truly was insane market pull for people being like,
absolutely. Yeah. And it's kind of like a cliche, but seriously, I started getting boxes of CDs from reputable record labels to shipped to our house. I was like, man, that's crazy. Seriously, we don't even have a product yet, and these people are willing to give us their entire catalog. That there's clearly a pain point here, right?
Okay. So, well, that's awesome. So you're clear pain point. Took you 2 years to even try to, let's say, we're really going to try to do this. And then how you going?
So started basically building the catalog, and building the platform itself so that we can actually launch a radio platform on the web only at first. And once we did, frankly, we were very naive. We're first-time founders. We started trying to get investors meetings and whatnot. It was nobody would even look at us. And when they did, everyone asked us the same question: how are you going to get listeners? And to this day, I remember the smirk on our faces. What do you mean? No commercials, no ads, no restrictions. Awesome music. It's all all the music went through editorial. Not anyone can get on Earbits. We wanted just high quality, professional music. We didn't want to end in the same situation of MySpace. I don't know if you remember. It was everyone became a musician, and it was not a good experience.
Nope.
Anyways, at some point after we launched, we applied for Y Combinator, following an advice from one of our very smart advisors who told us, hey guys, you should just apply. Because we were skeptical. We thought we're too far ahead. Yeah. Question?
What year was this?
We applied in 2010.
Okay. So Y was very early then, right? When did YC start?
Started in 2005.
Okay, so it's into YC. So it was a big deal, but not that big a deal yet. They hadn't had major big exits then yet.
It was a huge deal. I mean, at that point, they produced Reddit and Dropbox and Airbnb. It was but it may not have been as well known as it is today, for sure. But once we started talking to people who knew what YC is and went through the program, we're like, holy shit, we have to get into YC. And then we got invited for an interview, 10-minute interview, in Silicon Valley. Drove up, got into the room, got grilled for 10 minutes mostly by Paul Graham. Went to my brother's house in Redwood City, and that evening we got the call, and we're in. We're one out of 43 companies in that batch, which is way smaller than what it is these days. And frankly, that was a huge pivotal point, both in the life of Earbits and in my life. Really, there's life before Y Combinator and life after. It really does change.
I think, had you not gotten in, would you have just been gone back? Who knows? It's hard to know.
Frankly, I think without YC, I highly doubt that we would have been successful. Seriously, it was so freaking difficult. It was incredible, because just the minute we got in, everything changed. All the the conversations that we had with some investors, all of a sudden, overnight, we became the cute girl that everyone wants to talk to. And look, it was a very fuzzy feeling. I didn't deny that.
Okay, so you get in, you're great. So it's easy to get investors to talk to you, but you still have to build a real company. So what did that entail? Or maybe what were the lessons also take away from YC?
Yeah, so we got in. I think probably that interview was late November of 2010. The program itself started January of 2011.
Okay.
And when you get into YC, you know that at the end of the program, there's demo day. And that's an opportunity that, to basically pitch in front of the, top tier Silicon Valley investors, hundreds of them in one room. I don't think there's any opportunity like that anywhere else.
Even today still?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, today it's just on a bigger scale, seriously. But yeah, like there's nothing like demo day, like YC demo day anywhere else.
Yeah.
In terms of the exposure, the competition also, and by competition, I mean the competition of the investors. They all know that they're all looking at the same 43 companies and there's only that much allocation available.
Yeah, it's kind of an amazing innovation just in doing a demo day, right? Just the idea of a demo day for helping startups.
Totally.
It's huge. It doesn't really embolden, it doesn't help VCs really. It helps the startups.
For sure. So YC was the first startup accelerator. So like the whole concept was, invented in 2005. And they managed to just do a phenomenal job on many different fronts. So in any case, like that you sort of have to race as fast as possible to achieve as much as possible during those 3 months, so that when you get on the stage and pitch your company, you bring the best version of yourself at that point. So it was really stressful. A few times during the program found myself like getting to a stress level that I was like, man, this like I'm so stressed that I'm finding it hard to operate. Like I need to really start like figuring out how to manage that level of stress.
Did you get any advice from YC or from colleagues about how to deal with that? Or like what advice? I mean, founders get stressed all the time, even if it's not YC pressure. How did you deal with it? What advice did you get?
I think in terms of advice, I don't think I've ever on that front went out and sought advice on that in particular, but I constantly did that on my own, trying to figure out how to solve this, and definitely reflected on many things that I've sort of like picked up during the years. So actually one of our first investor was a friend of mine who was a serial entrepreneur. And I remember I would like in the past when I met with him, he was like building a company. He had 100 employees and always like talked about it. It was like, yeah, but we may die in a month, like, so like, and I was questioning like, what he doesn't care but then as I was getting stressed out, I realized that you really do need to have a level of stoicism. But like when you build a startup, there's so much outside of your control when it comes to building a startup. So I've always been into like yoga and meditation and things like that. So I just try to use those tools to basically find some balance. Sometimes more successfully, sometimes not. It's hard. But yeah, so during the program, we raised as much as we could. We actually got a lot of things, quite impressive things done, including a partnership with the San Francisco Chronicle, which is the biggest publication in the Bay Area. We partnered with them to build them like a wide label solution, like a radio that will feature all the bands from the Bay Area. It was like a huge deal, and we thought that we're gonna get like amazing outcome from it. On paper, it looked fantastic. In reality, it was a huge flop. Like, yeah.
That's usually the case with so many partnerships. Everyone gets so excited by a partnership and it rarely pans out, is what I found. It sounds great. Okay, so failed, but okay, you raise all this money, demo day, your actual races, have these flops, have some things go on. What were the key elements? How big did the company grow? How much revenue did you get? You ran it for like 7 years, if I recall,
So we built the company, again, like when we started, we had 0 artists and 0 listeners. 4 years later, we were streaming more than 2 million songs every month. We had more than 15,000 bands and 700 record labels on the platform. So we had good traction. But so, yeah, that sounds like wow. But when you compare those numbers to Pandora or Spotify or any other big player, it's not even a blip, right? It's like, and again, like I think the biggest hurdle for us was not getting artists to pay for airtime. We actually, I'll get to that in a minute, but the biggest hurdle was actually delivering the airtime. So getting, just like scaling the amount of listeners that we have.
Mhm.
So in the first year, we haven't even launched the paid aspect of it. We just wanted to get up the catalog to grow. And then about a year into it, we were somewhat pressured by investors to demonstrate that artists would pay for this kind of service. So we're like, okay, well, let's launch like a beta, and we'll offer the paid service to like to those who are interested. So we reached out to our artists, and I was shocked. We basically had like a huge interest in people who wanted to pay to get extra exposure.
Yeah.
And there was the demand was basically too high. At a certain point, we had to stop selling airtime because it took us too long to deliver the airtime.
But doesn't that mean you're charging too low a price?
So we started by charging a cent per stream. Okay. So every time we stream your song, we charge you a cent. A month into it, Joey, my co-founder, came into my room. He said, "We need to raise the price." And I was like, "No, we shouldn't." We doubled the price, no problem at all. A month later, we increased the price again, no problem at all. So yeah, absolutely. Like the demand was absolutely there. So I think we've validated so much of what we thought was a lot of our theories of what we think. 4 years into it, we had relatively good revenue. We had okay growth, but we didn't have a hockey stick type of growth that would allow us to go out and raise a lot more capital.
Yeah.
And we just felt that probably the best outcome would be to get acquired. And in 2015, that's exactly what happened. We got acquired by a company out of the East Coast. And basically, they loved what we were doing, really aligned with their vision. So they acquired us and allowed us to continue building what we've started.
It's great. And was that a decent exit for you?
It was mostly equity. So it was okay. It wasn't a life-changing type of exit, but it was an exit.
And so, okay, so you exit, and then basically you go from there. I don't know how long it took, but like you essentially then become an investor.
Right. So I stayed on board under the company that acquired us for another 2 years. And at the end of 2016, decided that it was time to move on. At the same time, also decided to move to Australia. So moved to Australia. And at that point, realized,
if I recall from our pre-conversation, was family reasons that you basically decided to move?
Yeah. So at the time, well, that was after living in the States for 17 years. I lived in Los Angeles. My wife and I were starting to think about having kids. I never really pictured myself raising a family in Los Angeles or San Francisco.
Yeah. So for the listeners who are in both locations, you can bash it, but like, why?
No, well, I think these two cities, they're great, particularly for business, for career. So, in Los Angeles, if you want to be in the entertainment business, film, music, whatever it is, there's no other place like that, right? I moved to LA as a musician, and within 3 months got a gig like composing music for a TV show. That would never have happened if I stayed in Boston. Seriously.
And you think it's just because you're meeting people in person? Like you couldn't like send them your resume, you had to meet them in person, right?
It's just so condensed with like basically every coffee shop you enter in LA, it's some actor or director or musician talking about their next project. So yeah, you're like constantly like meeting people from the industry. Then you drive up to San Francisco 7 hours, and every coffee shop, it's a founder pitching an investor.
100%.
So it's very condensed, which is great if you're really into building those type of businesses. But other than that, like for me, LA just feels like kind of like it's so big, and like it just lacks some soul when it comes to family, I suppose. I don't know how to explain.
I personally generally, I don't know LA that well, but I kind of agree about it. San Francisco also, I mean, I think San Francisco has a lot of soul, but each neighborhood is kind of unique and different. And
yeah,
they're all different.
And at the same time, I've seen my nephews grow up here in Brisbane, Australia, and visited a few times, and it's just a beautiful city. And we didn't really have much of a plan, but we decided to move and see how it will go.
That's, I mean, well, I get one thing, I give you a lot of credit though for that decision in the sense that like you're a tech founder, you're getting into the ecosystem, all that other stuff. Like that was kind of your career and your thing. So like to move kind of across the world, right? You're living in the future. You're a day ahead of me right now. So like that's a big decision.
It was a big decision, and actually, it was also a decision between two. So I got a job offer with Web Summit in Europe, in Ireland. I flew over there for a week, and frankly, like it was like just gloomy all the time, and people were kind of like grumpy. I was like, I don't think I can do that. So it was a decision between like a proper position in Europe or kind of like figure out what's next in Australia. But we just decided that the proximity to family would be important, and that we love the city and the weather. So let's go and see what happens. But yeah, it was um, taking a risk, I suppose.
And given that you took that risk, you still to this day, I mean, you maintain clearly very close ties to the Bay Area, tech space, since you've been a very prolific and successful investor. So walk me through briefly about like how did you start getting into investing? Like why did you even choose to go the investing route? And then we'll talk a bunch about like what do you look for? How do you make your decisions? I'm sure at some point probably come back to your company and Earbits as well. Like how big did Earbits get? Like how many people on the team? All this stuff.
We were 15 people. It wasn't good. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So investing in YC, I mean, having gone through the program and being close to the YC ecosystem, you just keep seeing the kind of value that YC produces and the kind of companies that come out of it. The most successful company from our batch is called the GOAT Group. They're valued now at $4 billion. These are like, two good friends that we it's incredible, right? And I realized that as an alumni, I'm in a very special, unique position because I get access to these deals. Now, getting access to these deals, unless you're, a top tier VC in Silicon Valley or part of the network, other people just don't get that.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. The other thing was I also realized that I have built a pretty strong network of people, with capital. So it was just putting one and one together. It's like, hey, how about we put like a fund and start investing in YC companies?
You're essentially saying like, use my access with your money and boom, we're good to go. That's actually very similar to what I did with my first investing when I started in 2011, where, I'm meeting all the startup founders. I'm going to all the events. I wasn't in YC, but going to all the events, doing all the stuff, sort of early days San Francisco. Early days, and some people might be laughing, but sort of early days, next round for San Francisco, which sort of started after 2008, and sort of had access to capital that didn't have access to early stage companies, and they wanted to match the two up, and I played matchmaker.
Right. Yeah, I mean, when it comes to investing, I mean, usually like. You really have to have some kind of a vantage point, right? Like what is unique about it? And in our case, it's really just that early access to YC deals. So in 2017, put together a small fund, invested in 19 companies, and it took just a little over 2 years for 2 of them to turn into unicorns. Another one got acquired by the New York Times. At that point, we're like, well, either we got lucky or we're onto something here. So in 21, raised a larger fund, invested in more companies, and the first 2 funds are outperforming 90% of benchmark venture funds.
It's amazing. What was your, outside of them being YC companies, was there any other criteria? Obviously, you still had some criteria because you're not investing in every single YC company.
Yeah, of course. So really the concept here is try to index YC. Try to build is almost like an ETF, right?
Where you push a better version, because isn't YC already the ETF in a sense? Because they're investing in every single one, and they get to choose the ones who come in. And
that's the added benefit here. So YC already, like these days, YC gets like more than 50,000 applications per year.
Crazy.
The acceptance rate is less than 1%. So you're getting really the cream of the crop in terms of like the founders that go into YC. In my opinion, there's just no better like deal flow than YC. And we get to choose from that. So we get to, from the whatever 100 or 200 companies in the batch, go and select the ones that we feel are the most promising ones and put together a diversified portfolio. So we'll just have a little bit of everything.
And why? So how do you choose? Like, how do you make those choices about the companies to target, out of 100, 200 in the batch, doing 10% of those that you think are the best?
Yeah, so I'll tell you how I used to think about it and how that shifted over the years and what we're doing with the new fund that we're raising now. In the past, we're very much over-indexed on early traction and the market opportunity / the idea. But the reality is that on demo day, many, if not most of the founders that are pitching ideas that they've just pivoted to like a week before, like seriously, like sometimes even days before. And many of them will have to pivot many more times after demo day until they find something that actually takes off. So whatever traction and market opportunity they're showing on demo day, it's interesting, but it's actually likely to change. The one thing that is not going to change are the founders, the founding team. So the individuals themselves, and perhaps more importantly, the connection or the relationship between those co-founders. Because what we've seen way too many times is founders get into YC. They've, just recently met, they started working, they apply for YC, they got in, fantastic. They start building. Sometimes they're even somewhat successful in building something, but then they realize that they don't know how to work together. And they start butting heads and the whole thing implodes. And that's the end of the startup.
Yeah.
On the flip side, we've seen founders that had that long history, of working together or being roommates, whatever it is. And those type of founders go the distance. And going back to the example of the GOAT group, Eddie and Daishin, the founders, they actually went through YC with a completely different idea. It was called Grub With Us. They raised $5 million at demo day. They spent about 6 months building the company after demo day. And then I remember one day I came to their office in Venice Beach, and they used to have like 30 staff. I walk in, the office is empty. It's just Eddie, Daishin, and their lead engineer. Like, guys, what's going on? They're like, yeah, we crunched the numbers. The business was like, it wouldn't scale the way we wanted to. So we're pivoting. Great. What are you going to do? We're like, we don't know.
Oh, wow.
They spent 4 years pivoting. Yeah.
My gosh.
4 years pivoting until in 2015, they came up with the idea of building a marketplace for used sneakers, the limited edition Jordan type.
Yep.
And yeah, that turned into a business that is now valued at $4 billion.
Amazing.
The moral of the story is that at demo day, I couldn't tell you if their idea is going to win, but I could definitely tell you that Eddie and Daishin are going to win.
So Eddie and Daishin were good friends, they were roommates before all that other stuff. So is that like?
Yeah, they had a couple of businesses before that they built. Like they knew each other really well. They were very aligned.
So is that basically the key criteria that you think makes for at least successful YC companies is these founders have clear long-term alignment? Is that?
I think, look, if it was that simple, then everyone would have been a successful investor, right? And it's not. But I do think that it plays a huge role, and it's the one thing that you can actually evaluate at that early stage that is going to be true also in the coming months. So what I'm saying is that I think people who have some history of working together and know how to work together are a lot less likely to survive the crazy ride that they're going to go on than those who don't have it. And in fact, so Joey and I, when we started Earbits, at that point, we're like 5 years into being, best friends, roommates, bandmates. Like, we were like, we knew each other really well. And yet, when we started the business, like the first few months were rough. Like we had to learn how to operate a business together. We're very different personalities. I remember having to take many walks to the beach to calm myself and to talk myself.
Like, don't punch my co-founder. Don't punch.
Right. But the reality is that, it was rough, but we quickly learned how to do that and how to operate well. And I do think that if you come into this like fresh with someone that you have no background with, it's just it is way harder.
So has YC identified that same trend? Like, do you think there's been an uptick in founders who have a stronger long-term relationship?
So actually, that's one thing that I think YC doesn't care about too much. So they care more about the quality of the individuals. I don't think they care at all how well those individuals know each other. And in fact, I know from experience of a couple of companies that I helped with in their process of applying for YC, there was a solo founder and he got the call and like, yeah, we would like to fund you, but can you get a co-founder? So basically like go get a co-founder, right? Like
just find a random person on the street who has a good technical background or something.
And that can lead to, to subpar selection of a founder.
Do you think they do that because their incentives maybe are a little bit different than yours? Or, I mean, like they still want great exits, obviously. So why don't you think they use that criteria as a data point?
It also took me a while to like come to this conclusion. I might be entirely wrong, right? Like this is my theory. This is my thesis. And this is like basically the thesis of our fund. We're looking for teams who have history together, obviously like, also exceptional individuals, but that can demonstrate that they would be able to go the distance.
Do you think everyone needs to have a co-founder? Like, would you
no
co-founder?
Yeah, I don't think it's, you're much better off being a solo founder than being in the wrong partnership. Just like you're better off, like it's similar to marriage, right? Like it's fantastic if you find the right person, then it's 1 + 1 then becomes a lot more than 2. But if it's the wrong partnership, it will derail the company. And again, like I've seen this way too many times.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe number one, I've talked to a lot of VCs, and maybe the number one risk factor for an early stage company is a co-founder breakup.
Yes, but it's funny with early stage VCs or just investors, because most of I'll include myself in that group. Most of us say that we care most about the founders if that's at that early stage. However, it's really difficult to, when you evaluate companies and opportunities, if you have like, let's assume you have two similar opportunities, but one of them, went from 0 to 200K ARR within a month, it will be really, really difficult for you not to bet on that one versus this one. Now, assuming this one has, a team that actually know each other and have worked well together in the past versus like, no, these guys just met. Again, like it will be really, really difficult to go in the one that you feel that connection.
But do you find yourself doing that? Like, are you forcing yourself to think through things that way? Like, when
I find myself having to basically, to reduce the amount of weight that I will give to early traction. Yes.
So when you see those 200 companies in YC in each batch, are you essentially only targeting the ones that have a long-term co-founder relationship?
Right. So that is the approach. Basically trying to identify the ones that have that history together. And then, that's not the only criteria, but that's the sort of like initial filter. Yes.
Okay. So actually, I just remembered something into all listeners. I apologize. They're questions I ask at the very beginning of every show. And we just got so distracted by being annoyed at the bad product decisions by, in this case, Riverside, but all the video companies are kind of video call companies. A key question, which sort of maybe is fine to put in right now. When you think through the companies you've invested in, and you think about the greatest entrepreneurs also in the world, right? And however you want to define it, how do you define entrepreneurial excellence? What is excellence to you, and what makes that great entrepreneur or that excellent entrepreneur?
That is a tough question.
That is the idea.
Because I think it encompasses so much. Like it's not one type of quality that makes a founder exceptional. I think it's a package of like a lot of different qualities that make.
Is it different for every excellent entrepreneur, or do you think there's a general set of in that package that everyone shares to some
I
extent, plus or minus. If
I think it comes in different flavors, but there are definitely some qualities that that as a founder you sort of like must have. Like it would be incredibly difficult, I think, to try to build a startup if you don't have thick skin, right? Like it will be really difficult to build a startup if you don't have the patience and the endurance to do it, right? Like it's not, again, the terrible cliche of, and it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, but it's true. It's not like, it is one thing that takes years to build. If you're just planning on like working really hard for like a few months and then run out of steam, you probably won't get there, right?
Right.
But yeah, it's a combination of so many things. But at the end of the day, there are many different types of successful founders. There's the outgoing, charismatic founder, and there's the shy and, introvert type of founders. So it doesn't mean that, like, I think often people think that you need to be a certain type, right? But that's not true. I think you can be yourself probably, but actually maybe that's one quality that they all share. I think they all realize that they have to continue to grow and learn a lot, because there's no, particularly as a first time founder, like there's so much that you don't know. If you come into it thinking that you know everything, you're going to fail, guaranteed.
Yeah.
And that's like again, another word that I don't like, the coachability.
Mhm.
But that's why, investors, if they feel that a founder is not coachable, well, it's another way of saying this founder thinks that he knows everything. And that's a red flag.
But don't you want founders who have just a certain degree of confidence? Sure, they're confident, because you have to have confidence where you think you're coming up with some idea that the world hasn't seen before, right? There has to be.
Yes. No, again, it comes in different flavors. I think there are, again, I'm worried or worry of founders who have too much confidence.
Mhm.
Because often that's just kind of like bullshit, like facade of like everything is gonna be fine. Yeah, sure, like, but like they don't actually know what they're talking about. Uh, you do need to have some level of confidence. You can't go into this journey with like feeling like you're going to fail. But I have no problem with founders who are skeptical. I think it's actually good to be skeptical. Again, going back to the example that I gave about my friend who, our first investor in Earbits, who, it was always like, yeah, we're building this, but we may fail. Um, Again, like there's so many factors outside of your control. So I think at the end of the day, you're just trying to do your best, and that's all.
Sure. But like, I'll push a little bit in this, right? So everyone's trying to do their best. I mean, hopefully, almost every employee at every company is trying to do their best on a regular basis. That does not mean every employee is going to be an entrepreneur ever. So, like, are there certain elements if you're like, okay, this is what's key? So, I mean, walk through the ones you said, right? So, patience, thick skin, endurance, essentially, grow, learning, coachability.
Well, I think you also have to have a very certain personality, right? Like being a startup founder is not for everyone, for sure. Like you need to have some serious drive for doing what it is that you're doing, right? It's pretty painful, right? You have to go through so much shit and like ups and downs and whatnot. And that's another thing that, again, when I talk about exceptional founders and how to try to identify them, that's a core aspect of it, is trying to understand, why are you doing this? Like, you're a smart person, you're highly capable, you're probably technical, you can get a high paying job, 9 to 5, you know don't have to stress too much. Why did you decide to turn that down and turn your life into misery over the next 5 to 10 years? Explain to me that, right? And I think the strong founders would be able to demonstrate that there's some need inside of them to build something, and that why can be very different for some people. For one founder, it may be because through they experienced the problem themselves, it was so big, so acute, and they were like on a mission, I need to solve this. For another, it might be that their dad never like respected them or gave them the credit that they felt that that are owed, and they have a chip on their shoulder, and they want to demonstrate to the world and to their dad that, like, here, I've built $1 billion business, right? But there needs to be some kind of a very strong motivation, because if there isn't, then the first time things get tough, they'll probably quit.
So do you ask that question to everybody? Like, because I agree, like if people need to have some sort of story, although at the same time, does that go against the advice that you said once again sort of goes for YC? Like a lot of these people will come up with an idea, they pivoted into that idea a few days before demo day, and now they're getting millions of dollars waved in their face. If you're pivoting into some idea randomly that you came up with, maybe you're really smart, you can move quickly. It's hard to imagine that you're necessarily passionate about that idea and have a underlying reason.
Right, that's true. So if someone tells me that, they're building this business because they're so passionate about it, and then on the next sentence, I realize that they pivoted to it like 2 weeks ago, that's a red flag.
Yeah,
right?
of course.
Like that doesn't make sense. And very often I feel with these type of questions, you may get, first of all, it's not just about the words that come out of the founder's mouth that matter. It's I think over the years you learn how to pay attention to other signals as well. And very often it's not, you have to ask the question a few times from different angles. Like if on the first time the answer I got felt like, okay, well, he's telling me what he thinks I want to hear, then maybe later in the conversation I will address it from a slightly different angle. And eventually, like, you get a pretty good sense if things add up or not. And if they don't, then you start having some sort of like a gut feel of like, And again, over the years, I've done this long enough to know how to like listen to those gut feeling, because like more often than not, they are correct. It's funny. It reminds me when we went through YC, I asked Paul Graham because at that time, like I had zero experience. And I was like, how do you guys like manage to make a decision within 10 minutes, 10-minute interview? And he said, well, we've been doing it for such a long time that give me 10 minutes and I can absolutely get a good feel of the founder. In fact, I just a few days ago talked to one of the founders from the very first batch, and he told me that PG told him that they actually wanted to make the interview 5 minutes, but felt that it would be rude. So
Right. So they can make a decision within 5 minutes, basically.
Yeah.
But even that, like even a sort of legendary investor like Paul Graham, what is the overall failure rate of YCs? It's still obviously way less than the average, but they're still only getting 10%, 15% right.
So the overall YC companies outperform the market by 8-fold. So
what percent are successful then versus fail? Like,
I guess it depends how we define success.
Let's say they return more money than they take in from investors. So the investors get some positive return.
Well, again, like overall, the YC portfolio, is now worth more than $800 billion.
Yeah, it's crazy, but that's but there's like a lot of outliers there. That does mean percentage wise.
That's true. The reality is that in the real world, 9 out of 10 companies fail, and in YC world, it's almost flipped. Where
I didn't know it was that.
Majority of them are either still alive or exited or got acquired, whatever it is. But yeah, like the percentage of those who actually failed and shut down is very low.
I did not realize it was that big a difference.
Don't quote me on the 10% on YC, but it is flipped. The majority are successful, and again, by successful meaning either still alive, building, or have had an exit.
That's amazing. And then you're trying to have an even better return than YC based on your choices. Of course, you're getting a slightly higher price than YC does too, so that maybe changes.
Yes, yeah, of course, YC gets the absolute best deal. But as early investors, we often are able to get into the deals in better terms than what later investors get.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so going back to your list, right? So thinking through like patience, thick skin, endurance, growth and learning mentality. How do you interview for those? How do you find the founders that you think really fit that? Like, how do you figure out if someone's patient or has a thick skin? Because every founder is going to tell you, like, yeah, like Yotam, I'm super patient. I have thick skin. I learn every day, right? That's sort of things that people just say yes to.
I don't think I approach these interviews as like, here, I have my set of like, 5 questions I'm going to ask, and here is the right answer, wrong answer. I can tell you what I prefer not to do, which is to spend a bunch of time talking about the size of the market and the like things like that. So I think it's the type of questions of like, tell me how you and your co-founder met, like how long you've known each other. Oh, cool. And then it's sort of like, instead of like then jump onto the next question, it's more about like picking, like if there was some detail within what they said that is either interesting or maybe alarming or whatever it is. Oh, tell me more about that, right? And I think what if you approach it that way, then you end up having a conversation, like and usually a fun conversation where they actually get to open up.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the key, right? Because if they feel comfortable, then they're more likely to start telling you how they really feel, as opposed to like all the canned responses that they had prepared before the call.
That I agree. And this is something with my investing, I try to be very, I tried, part of why I like doing it from the entrepreneurial side of things as an entrepreneur operator versus like a real investor. Because I don't view myself as a full-time investor by any means. But you have a real conversation with someone. You have a discussion about like, what are your real challenges? Like what bothers you right now? Don't give me your canned pitch. Let's just talk about it.
Yeah. And to be frank, very often these conversations turn into, instead of like an investment pitch, more into like, hey, just like sharing some things with me, and I can share back like my thoughts about that. So eventually they also get better value out of it. And yeah, I think I approach it also from a founder's perspective, because at the end of the day, I still feel that I'm more of a founder than an investor, despite the fact that I'm not building a startup at the moment.
Yeah.
But it's just, that's how I feel.
Yeah. And so, okay, so it's just like having these conversations. So those are sort of the key criteria, the things you think like are most kind of valuable for excellent entrepreneurs. If you think through any of the ones who are like the outsized ones, the really successful folks, okay, so they good partners, things like that you've either worked with, you maybe were NYC with, you're friends with, are there any certain qualities that really stand out with them that make them truly excellent and different?
So adding to everything that we've just said, they're incredibly ambitious and they're incredibly hardworking. Like they're, willing to sacrifice often too much.
Can you define that a little bit more? Because I think a lot of people don't either fully understand what it means to work really hard or sacrifice, or think they do that, but it's probably not really true unless they compare themselves with some of these greats.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it. Although I would say that again, like sometimes I feel that the level of sacrifices that people are willing to make is not necessarily healthy. Like, and I do think that it is possible to build a very successful startup and still maintain some sort of like balance in your life. I think a great example of that would be Mark Randolph, CEO, founder of Netflix.
Okay. Yep.
Who also happened to be one of our advisors at Earbits. And he, both in his book and like he very often mentions how Tuesday evening for him was just a rule. 5 p.m. he goes home having like a date with his wife. Like no matter what kind of fires there are in the office, he's out. Like and that, so I do think that
would you say like, people know Reed Hastings is sort of the really big name from that. And I don't know Reed's personal story at all, but was he sort of, did it take a good, strong, one of the founders who really was sacrificing everything no matter what? And maybe Reed was that person. So Mark could go home on Tuesday.
Yeah, so I think there are a lot more examples of founders who, like successful founders who have basically sacrificed their entire life in order to get to where they are.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of founders look at that as kind of like the role model. And it is true. Like you will need to make a lot of big sacrifices to achieve something great, right? Kind of like the introduction of like, yes, you have to make sacrifices, but I think they're like, you have to be mindful of like be mindful about how you make those sacrifices and about the fact that you're making them.
But I mean, as an investor, do you want to invest in the founder who's willing to sacrifice everything? Like, wouldn't you want, you might, as a personal, on an individual level, you might be like, that's not healthy for your life. Right, but investor, you probably want that. Like, I want someone who's going to be sacrificing almost everything for this
just
outcome.
as long as that is the right choice for them, and that they would actually be able to endure that, right? So yeah, absolutely, you are looking for founders who are 100% committed. Like any signal that demonstrate that that's not the case, you're like, right?
So what are the signals? What do you look for dedication? How do you identify that? I don't want to say like, what does it look like to truly make those sacrifices? Like, think through the people you know.
Sure.
What are the sacrifices that they've made in their lives?
Yeah. Again, going back to Eddie and Daishin, what did this guy do? Like when they landed for their YC interview in the Bay Area, and the day before, instead of like preparing for the interview, they just went out and hustled trying to get new customers. Right? They couch surf because they wanted to save money on rent in SF. So they just like they would, basically crash with all of the rest of the cohort.
Yeah.
These founders that do stuff that you're like, who does that? Like, founders of Airbnb, like in the early days, like went and like sold the cereals to like generate some revenue, like both like super, like, ingenious idea and like very creative, and just like having the balls to do that. Right. Like, so I think looking for people who are not following the like, okay, well, I read in the book that, as a founder, you should do X, Y, Z. So I'm doing that. It's like, actually, fuck the book. Here are like, I have a few crazy ideas. Let's go and try that. Right. And really stopping at nothing and being unfazed by the fact that 9 out of 10 times, like whatever you tried failed. You're like, whatever, that failed. Then you try the next thing. Right. Because that 1 out of 10 might be something that actually works really well.
But I would say that's not, so that's having crazy ideas and willing to just work hard. But like, what about sacrifice? What do you think Eddie and Daishin gave up? Like, they flew to San Francisco to do their interview. So, okay, they're just crazy about their ideas. They're going to go hustle for customers. But like, what did they give up? Or what have other ones given up?
Well, I think what we all give up during that journey, I shouldn't say all, but like, the startup becomes the thing that you care about most. I don't know if that's true for all founders, but it's definitely true for me. I get obsessed. And some like I think it's both a superpower, but also like a big risk, because, when I get into something, then all I think about is that something. And from the moment I wake up, sometimes even during like at night, you find yourself like thinking through
For sure.
things related to the business. And then it reflects through everything that you do. So, I know that when we were building Earbits, like I saw my friends a lot less frequently. You don't take vacations, like you just sacrifice everything else because you feel like, you have to work as hard as possible until this thing get to where you want it to be. Now, the problem with that is that it never actually gets to the place you want.
Right. The problems don't go away. It's not like, oh, suddenly we're 100 people and I have fewer problems. It's like, no, it's like,
and I can tell you from having talked to many unicorn founders, these are people like operating companies valued at like billions of dollars, having hundreds of millions in revenue. They feel the same. They feel like, I still have to push. I still like, we can still die. We can still like, so, and that's why I think it's important to try to keep some kind of balance, and to be mindful about the sacrifices you make, because the reality is that there are going to be periods where you just can't do anything else, and maybe the whole business is on fire, and really like you're trying to save it from going, from crashing, and you find yourself having to, sprint through some days or weeks where it's really just nonstop. But if you do that constantly, I don't think you can do that for years. And if you do, you end up being a very unhealthy person. What's his name? Brian Johnson, the Don't Die guy. Yeah. So I think that's kind of like a pretty good example of that. Like, that's what he did, right? He basically sacrificed everything to build the business. He was extremely successful, sold the company.
I think it was 800 million, right? Sold for
Yeah.
something to PayPal.
And at that point realized that he's completely broken. Like, that like, except like the only thing that worked well for him was his bank account, and the rest was just completely broken.
Yeah.
And then, this, I think there's so many people who get to the same position, where the sort of like the thinking is, I will work super hard for those years. I'll sacrifice everything. Then I'll be super rich and I'll be so happy for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
You get to that point and you realize, well, that's great. I have a ton of money, but I feel like shit. I've lost my friends. I've lost my family. And not always, but like very often that's the outcome.
So then why do people do it? So this sort of brings like, why are there 50,000 people applying to YC every batch or every year, whatever it is? Like what is the magical thing that people are so excited to be a part of when it breaks you?
I think it's a few things. And again, like different motivation for different people. Some people are very attracted by the idea of like, I want to become a millionaire, basically. I want to become rich. And it seems like this is the best path of doing that. Some people go into it because they're really passionate about just building, right? Like they care less about the outcome. They care more about just passionate. I want to build something that will be of good utility to the world and people, and they're motivated by that. Some people are just, they love the rush, and there's something addictive about it, right? Like, and I think that's why it was difficult for me after I left Earbits to sort of like figure out what to do next, because I very much missed that feeling of like, building a startup, despite the fact that it's like torture and like all the, ups and downs. But there's something very fun about it. It's not
addictive almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you see like, founders who go and build, they have their first exit and then go on to the next and next and next. It is.
I'm a four-time founder, so I'm one of those crazy people.
Right. And you ask yourself, well, why am I doing this? Particularly
sometimes
if I don't need the money and the headache and the pain. Well, why do people get on like, roller coaster? Because they crave the ups and downs.
It's sort of the rush.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So what other qualities, right? So going back to your key list of qualities, right? The like growing and learning. How do you identify that or think about that? Like, what is the growth mindset, and how do you find that in people? Or are there ways you found for people to engage in it?
So I think, again, through conversation and I think the best way to learn about the person is not ask them about like, tell me what you're going to do and what are your plans. It's more about tell me what have you done, right? Mm-hmm. Because, we all think about the future in a certain way, and we all think that we're going to achieve certain things, but that like, it doesn't always materialize. But speaking about the past, like those are things that already happened. So for example, if I meet a founder that actually came into solving a problem that they don't really belong to in, right? Like it's not their necessarily, they like, maybe there's not like a founder problem fit necessarily, and they started 2 months ago. I will then ask them a bunch of questions of like, well, first of all, why did you choose to work on this problem? You have no experience in this problem.
Yeah.
And tell me like, what have you learned about this problem in the 2 months that you've been working on it? And very quickly you'll be like, holy shit, like this person like in 2 months became from like knowing nothing about it to like now an expert, versus like, oh, like can barely speak about the sector, about the problem, about the opportunity.
Yeah, I found that too.
So again, just focusing on like examples from the past, like, tell me how you go about learning a new skill. Like I had to learn a bunch of new skills. Actually, when we started Earbits, I remember clearly telling Joey, hey, Joey, like, I'll be in charge of everything music. You'll be in charge of everything business, and Ben will be in charge of tech. 2 weeks into like running the business, I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna work. Right? Someone needs to do like customer support. Someone needs to do like marketing.
Yeah,
And
figure out.
and to my surprise, I realized that I actually really enjoyed jumping on those things that I had no idea how to do and figure out how to do them. Now, of course, I didn't become an expert in any one of those areas, but I became good enough to like make enough impact. So I think you're looking for people who are open minded. Like for example, many of the YC founders are tech, like the they have the yes. Um, so if you're only technical and you're unable to like sell your product or talk to a person about your product, that's going to be a problem, particularly if you don't have a co-founder who's really good at doing that, right? So getting a sense of like how open they are to wearing a bunch of hats, different hats, because they'll have to do that.
What is I think all that makes sense. What about kind of changing subjects a little bit for a second, because you keep bringing it up, and well, actually, first I want to ask, where's Joey and you worked together in Earbits for a long time. Where's Joey today? Is he stayed in the tech scene, or is he gone in?
Yeah, Joey currently lives in Mexico. Since Earbits, he has done a bunch of different things, worked with a bunch of different startups. He's also an artist, so he actually paints. He's super talented. He's an interesting character, to say the least. So currently he's doing just a bunch of different things.
But not really tech. So he's kind of gone in a different direction. He said, I did my startup and doing different stuff in life.
Yeah, but have been also involved with a few other startups over the years.
Okay. And then the part of why I asked is because you keep bringing it up, and it means, to me at least, you're probably philosophical about some of these things. How do you think about like work-life balance or work-life harmony as an entrepreneur? Like, what does that look like? How do the best entrepreneurs manage that? I mean, let's maybe pretend they find a way to manage something along those lines. What does that actually look like?
Honestly, I think the key here is not the how many hours per day they're spending on what, and is it balanced or unbalanced. It's more about how mindful are they of the decision they're making and how they go about balancing their life.
Okay.
Because I think the ones that struggle are the ones that basically don't make a decision. They're sort of like just being dragged into like, oh my God, I have so much work. I'll just work, and completely forget about the fact that I have other things in my life. Versus the ones that realize that, okay, well, I recognize that I have a ton of work, but I also recognize there are a few other things in my life that are really important to me. This week is actually really tough, so I'm going to spend 95% of my time on work and 5% on the other things that are really important to me. But next week, I'm going to reevaluate, and I think I probably would need to spend more time on the other thing, like basically find the time to spend on the other things that I care about. Basically, they are able to monitor how they feel and how they spend their time and make sure that it doesn't go completely out of whack. Because, I've seen founders, just burn out. You get to the point that, and when that happens, that can be game over, because you've worked so hard, and then one day you can't get out of the bed. You can't open your computer. You can't do anything. It's like, I just can't deal with it anymore. It's game over.
Yeah.
And then you have to spend, some time on the couch, just like, looking at the ceiling, doing nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I've understand that mindset for sure. I personally try to be a lot healthier with the way I do things now. Although I said a variety of times on the show, not to you before, but to others, like, I still think even in my own life today, I really only have time for two things, which is my family and for work. And I try to see my friends here and there, but I don't have a lot of time for that. And that's just the trade-off that I'm willing to make right now.
Yep.
I try to keep it relatively healthy. I try to force myself to go to bed at a decent time, so at least I wake up every day and show up for my team and for my company with a high degree of energy and focus, because I think that sleeping well enables me to do that, and staying healthy. Like, I basically never get sick, knock on wood, like all these things that enables me to be a better founder and leader. But there's still sacrifices for sure.
Absolutely.
But yet I wouldn't have it any other way. So
I think the other thing is actually being very mindful about how you spend your time when you work, because it's so easy to just be busy. It's a lot harder to actually spend the time on the things that matter the most and be effective on those things. So having a very clear idea of like, okay, well, today, what is my top priority? Maybe one or two or three, depending on size, and making sure that you stay the course of like, okay, well, this is what I like. If I achieve those three things today, that's success for me. And then finding like basically being concentrated on doing that. It's funny because my son is now 5 years old. Since he was born, obviously that's like, for me, that's priority number one.
yeah,
Over everything else. But all of a sudden you go from like having 24 hours of the day to like, you have a lot less time.
all less.
But I actually found out that despite the fact that I have less time, I'm actually a lot more efficient, because that time becomes so much more precious. You're like, yeah, like if I have an hour, it's not an hour to like, I'll just check some social media first and maybe like, no, I have 60 minutes. I need to get something done. Let's go. Like just be very focused on getting the job done.
So once again, also agree with that. I think that's a key thing. You unintentionally hit on a key pet peeve of mine, which is a lot of founders are actually really bad, even if they don't have kids. They're just really bad at figuring out what the priorities are and where they should spend their time. Do you have any heuristics around what are or what should be the highest priorities for a founder? Like how do you make that decision on a daily basis? Because you might say, like, I'll give you an example that's pet peeve. You're like, well, I need to figure out what's the best payroll system, right? So my company, we do back office operations for startups. We run this for them. Yeah. And I come across founders like, no, I feel obligated to go figure out a good CEO understands why we chose the payroll system and how the payroll system works. And I'm like, what are you talking about? A good founder yes, you need to make sure your team gets paid. You don't need to know any of the other details. You spending an hour on a sales call with vendor A and vendor B when their sales teams are going to tell you the exact same thing and why they're the best in the world, and you have no context to make that decision. What are you talking about that being good use of your time? Like, it's like TikTok for startup founders. It's empty calories of time wasting that you feel like you accomplished something, but you really did nothing at all, except it made you fat and lazy and is going to kill your startup. So I'll get off my soapbox, but how do you help people come up with that decision and think through what they should focus on, when they should focus on it? Because there are a million different distractions every day that are coming to a founder's attention.
I think it's a skill that founders have to build over time. And I think that's one thing that I find that I'm very often helpful to founders if like in terms of mentorship, because if we like get on a call and start talking about what are you working on, it's very easy for me to then to probe them to like, well, is this really the top priority of what you're working on? And 9 out of 10 times it's like by the end of the call they're like, oh, actually no, it is not. But I think it's not something that like happens overnight. You have to, because every day you have to make those decisions, right? Of like, what is the top priority today? What is the top priority this hour? And you just, I think, hopefully as a founder, just become better at doing that. But you can only get better at doing this if you're actually mindful of the decisions that you're making. Like if you're even mindful about what it is that you're working on, right? If you're just going with the flow and like, I'll work on whatever I see on my plate today, it's you're not going to be better at like prioritizing. You're just going to continuously just doing work.
Do you think, so you talked a lot about one of your criteria is basically founder, co-founder partnerships and how long they've been together. Do you think founder experience is important? And like, in other words, is it someone who's like straight out of college, they've never managed anyone in their entire lives, or someone who's built a few companies previously, or at least managed some people before, or been in some senior position? Like, what are there any key criteria?
So I think the repeat founder probably has learned a bunch of lessons already. And in that regard, more experience, probably it will make less of the obvious mistakes. However, I think what's more important is the long-term potential. So I don't care if someone is totally inexperienced, as long as they demonstrate that they have the capability of learning very quickly and improving. Because let's say on day zero, you have the experienced founder here and the inexperienced here. But if you have, if the inexperienced one is really talented and really like have the right growth mindset, he may very quickly reach here, while this one will still be stuck here because he already has like a perceived notion of like how to do things and might be less open to actually learning new things.
Yep.
So it's not necessarily about what you know today. It's more about like your potential of what you will know in the coming years.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, although I do think that's hard to judge probably early on as an investor because you're still early in someone's journey, you can't really judge it. But fair enough. I want to switch gears just for a second because I think you said you had some strong opinions about this, and I'm just curious about it. Your earliest experience, or maybe not earliest experience, but your sort of key foundational early experience, since you listed on your LinkedIn, being a commander in the IDF. Why has the IDF produced so many really successful founders and entrepreneurs?
I don't think that it's not just the IDF, it's Israel. So Israel has produced the insane amount of tech startups that have been there.
On a per capita basis, it's probably better than even California, which per capita was
perhaps number 2 or something like that for a country of like 8 million people. It's just,
which for context for people, 8 million people in all of Israel. There's 8 million people in the entire California, San Francisco Bay Area is 8 million people. In 55 million in all of California. So there's a huge difference in size between the two.
Yeah. So there's been a bunch of research and books written about it. There's one good book called Startup Nation that try to analyze and understand why is this happening. And I think the main reasons, there are a few, but the first one is I think Jews and and Israelis, they feel that they have to fend for themselves. They're have been constantly attacked from all directions, and they feel that they need to survive. There's like a very strong need for survival, and for that reason, a strong need for innovation. Also, by the fact that when Israel became Israel, like as a country, there wasn't much there. There was a very strong need to innovate and turn that desert into a place that people can live and grow.
Do you think on that? Sorry, pause you there really quick. So I very much agree with that thesis. But I wonder, do you think that actually applies to a lot of really successful founders, irrespective of whether they're Jewish or from Israel? And what I mean by that is, if you think through the histories of many of them, not all of them certainly, they had something in their lives, right? Elon Musk clearly, like we all know, very famously had a lot of early childhood trauma. I'm blanking on his name, but there's so many different founder ones who've had, like Steve Jobs has had so many. He was adopted. That I'm sure shaped his life in some ways. So many have some childhood trauma or challenge or adversity that leads them to saying, I need to fend for myself, and it forces you to have a level, or the Google guys, at least one of them, right? Immigrant from Russia, didn't speak English, all this other stuff. You have to find a way to fend for yourself and essentially innovate out of a problem because no one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think many founders are driven by chip on the shoulder, something that they feel that they need to prove something that they. Yeah, absolutely. So that's part of it. The other part is the military service that is compulsory in Israel. So whether you like it or not, you're going to spend 3 years, with a bunch of people, and you have to learn how to work together. That's an experience that forces you to learn how to work in teams. That's the first part of it. The second part is that there's a lot of innovation that comes actually from IDF, and then many people take that stuff and turn it into startups. So I think it's just a combination of a few things that really enabled Israel to produce just huge amount of tech startups.
Yeah, that's amazing. So one of the last questions I ask everybody on the call and on the show is, if there's one single piece of advice that you would give to every entrepreneur who wants to achieve excellence, what is that single piece of advice? So no compound answers like the answer to my first, the general kickoff question that I ask. Single piece of advice.
To achieve excellence, I think the first one, realizing that if you want to achieve excellence, you have to accept the fact that you'll never achieve it. Because that's the whole point here, is to always try to do better, right?
Right. So you're always striving.
Yes, it's the same, my background as a musician. Like, if you're a musician that feels like I've mastered my instrument, it's at that point that you stop being the best musician. It's always, it's always wanting to continue to explore, continue to become better, right? So that's the first part. And I think the second part to getting there is by actually doing, because I think there are many people who want to do things, but they're just in their heads, like planning or thinking or coming up with excuses why they shouldn't start today. And really the only way of becoming better at anything, in my opinion, is actually going out and doing something. So, if you have an idea, it doesn't matter even if it's completely half-baked, go and try to do something. Like, don't just have it in your head and say one day I'll do something with it.
Yeah. You don't want to get to a point, you don't want to get to becoming an old man or woman and get to a point in your life and say, gosh, it's too late now for me to start it. I wish I'd started it earlier, because time is flying by. There is no time like the present. So get out there and get it started.
Totally. Yeah.
Amazing. Yotam, how can folks get in touch with you, reach out if they want to learn more? Where can they find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Okay, amazing. And if you're lucky enough to have Yotam on your cap table, you should definitely get him. Obviously, get into YC first, but get him on your cap table. I think you'll learn a lot and be lucky to have you involved.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you for the time.